Welcome to the Girl Dad Show.
Welcome to the Girl Dad Show, a professional parenting podcast. Each month, I interview entrepreneurs, leaders, and professionals who are balancing parenthood, life, and profession in the hopes to learn what it takes to be an amazing professional parent. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Girl Dad Show. Today, I had Nami on my show, and she was such a delight. It was an amazing interview that I know you will love. Going back to her childhood in Nepal, transitioning from finance to a tech business, getting acquired, and her journey fundraising while she's delivering her kid, to starting her second tech company, and how she thinks about parenting while she's building her next business. It is a very, very great episode, and it's so true to what the thesis of the show is about, and I hope you enjoy it and learn as much as I did from it. Thank you. Nami, thank you so much for joining me on my show.
Of course, it's so much fun, and I'm so looking forward to just talking about all things parenting and entrepreneurship here. And also, we haven't caught up for such a long time, so this is a great way to do that.
That's a good point. We actually haven't we met. It's been almost a year ago, right?
Yes, almost a year ago.
Wow, have I been trying to get you on this show for over a year then?
Yes, and it's completely on me that I've not been able to schedule. And as a parent, I think you would understand. It's always there was one time when we were trying to schedule it, and then my kid got sick, and it's so funny because my kid has been sick this entire week as well. But then I'm like, what? I need my time. I need to catch up with my friends. So this time it's finally happening.
I love it. Well, I totally am understanding and empathetic. It's one of the interesting things about running the show is that I work, I interview, builders and creators and entrepreneurs and executives, and and I also interview, and they're also parents. It's two of the most busiest things, and I'm asking them to constantly schedule with me. So believe it or not, it is actually very, very common for reschedules and mapping things out. But I think you might hold the record for the longest reschedule. I'll have to look at that and see.
I will tell you more about other reasons why we could not schedule. But
yeah, I love it. I'll make you a shirt or a trophy.
Yeah.
Well, let's jump into it. Why don't you tell the listeners what you do for a living?
Yeah, so I'm a tech entrepreneur. I am currently the founder and CEO of Niural.com, which is a global payments and compliance technology platform specifically focused on enabling real-time payments for employees and employers worldwide. So this is my second financial technology startup. My previous company was called Harvest, which I sold to Acorns in 2021. That was an AI company. Basically, what we did was using AI to negotiate consumer debt for American consumers, right? So if you had overdraft fees, if you had credit card debt, if you had personal loans, we'd negotiate all of that using AI. And it was a really phenomenal, highly successful product. I sold that to Acorns in 2021. I've been in the tech ecosystem for a long time. I actually started out in tech as one of the early employees at Twitter. I was their pre-IPO, and I had seen the early days, I had seen the IPO days, I had seen the post-IPO days, and I got out just in time, I think, to avoid all of this drama that Twitter is seeing right now. Luckily, that I left Twitter to really start my own company. But yeah, I've been in tech for a whole lot of time, and I started my career as an investment banker on Wall Street, but then quickly realized that was not what I wanted to do. So then moved into tech, and haven't looked back since.
And then, what did you do at Twitter, if you don't mind me asking? What was it, finance, or was it?
No, it was not finance. It was product. So after my stint on Wall Street, I actually decided to kind of move full-time into tech, and I had some amount of kind of technology background from my college days. So I decided to actually leave investment banking altogether and then join Twitter as a product manager. So I was the head of product partnerships at Twitter.
You did a lot of jumping around. So you started in finance and went down the traditional financial route. I'm assuming just every other well-to-do, educated, like successful person chooses to do. And you said, hey, I'm not doing this. And you jumped into tech fully, like
Full
with 2 feet
force.
in. And you went, yeah, you didn't even do
Yeah.
finance. You went right into product. That's amazing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I had graduated from Harvard with a math degree. And, at that time, right, like, this was like immediately after like the financial crisis and whatnot. Like at that time, it's still like the glamour of Wall Street was still there.
Yeah.
And, all of these employers would come on campus and, before you even start your senior year, you would have gone through interview process and everything and you'd have a job,
Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
and then most of those jobs were in consulting and investment banking. So like 80% of my class, that's what I did, right? But then after doing that for a couple of years, I realized that my personality is not somebody that just like kind of sits behind an Excel sheet or PowerPoint presentation. I'm a lot more of an extrovert and I need a different kind of setup and I enjoy different kinds of things. And then I also didn't like traditional finance very much. I wanted to be more on the cutting edge side of things. And then I moved into tech and it has been the best decision I've ever made.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love that story. I love that story because it sounds like you're constantly adventuring and you're like finding yourself and making it work, which is really cool because I think it's really hard to make that jump to even begin with, like from finance and that kind of security and that industry, right? Because it's kind of like if you stick with it, you're gonna make money, and it's kind of stable.
Yes.
And then for you to go like, hey, I'm gonna make a jump into tech, and then you did even crazier things because you took a stable job in tech at obviously a very established company like Twitter. And what made you ditch that and then risk it all again to go start your own company? What was that process like? And then when did you have kids in between this? Like
Oh my God.
when did that happen? Yeah.
You see, this is why, the explanation behind like why it's so difficult to schedule things with me is like, I do a lot of different things. So it's funny and, interesting topic to, kind of think about risk taking because when I decided to move from Wall Street to tech, I was an international student on an H-1B visa. And so it's risky to change careers, but it's even riskier when you don't know what's going to happen in terms of visa transfers. And there's a lot of uncertainty when it comes to, because H-1B visas are tied to your specific employer. And if you want to work for somebody else, it has to transfer and there's a whole lot of process. Now, you always have to kind of count your blessings. I'm lucky that I got an H-1B visa. It's always done through a lottery, right? So I'm glad I got, a spot in that lottery. So you have to count your blessings. But at the same time, I've also been, I'm very risk averse in kind of physical adventure. Like if you ask me to go skydiving, I do not have the heart to do it. But I'm very comfortable with taking risks when I feel like there are certain factors that I can control, and especially kind of intellectual scenarios or things that you can kind of make happen with your hard work and you have a little bit of confidence in you. I think for those kinds of things, I'm a lot more open to risk. And that is what you see in my career. I, took a risk, kind of going from Wall Street to tech and then leaving a very, very cushy, almost rest and vest kind of job at Twitter to starting my own company as a female minority founder and then doing that in financial technology and on the list. And then I also, I became pregnant and had a baby when I was doing my first startup. It's funny, we can talk about it in a little bit as well, but I closed my second round of fundraise for my last startup from the hospital bed. I was awaiting a C-section.
No way!
Yes. And then that's what I did. So I've gone through so many kind of intense experiences.
Why would you do that?
Well, then now, after my first startup, it became very successful. I sold it. Then, everybody was like, "Oh my God, Nami, now you're all set for life." Now, all of a sudden, again, I'm back into this founding game, right? And everybody is like, "Are you a glutton for punishment or what? Why are you doing this to yourself?" And I think it's just me. I have this kind of fire in me to kind of make my own dent in the universe, and I also kind of continuously seek kind of perfection in myself. And I don't want any of the things that I've already done, or I can. It's much easier to be just a parent compared to being a parent and an entrepreneur, a founder of a financial technology company. But at the same time, I also need to kind of have my individuality going on, in addition to being a parent. So there are some of those aspects that just keep me pushing forward.
Oh, I love it. You probably have articulated the thing that I've been struggling to articulate so well. You just totally just put it on, you just put a thumb right on it. And I gotta I can't wait to re-listen to this episode so I can hear you say it again. But I don't know, where do you think you got that from? Where is that? Talk to me about your childhood. How did you grow up?
So I am originally from Nepal. I was born in Nepal and I grew up there. My family, I have really amazing parents. My dad, he was born in a village in Nepal. His own dad died when he was 1 year old. He's one of 5 kids. So he grew up as an orphan and he didn't have that many things, growing up, right? My mom is one of 10 kids and she also did not have a lot growing up. But one thing that my parents did, obviously they studied and they got kind of middle class jobs, and they were middle class by Nepalese standards, which is the poorest of the poor here. but even that said, one thing that they always did was put an emphasis on my education. So their children's education, they were you have to make sure that you have to get a good education. And then second, despite Nepal, when I was growing up 20 years ago, for example, was a very, very conservative place, right? It's one of the lower developed countries in the world, and it was a very conservative place, especially for women growing up. It still is a very conservative place for women growing up, but my parents gave me a lot of independence. They trusted me, and they really, kind of had a lot of faith in me being able to make good decisions. Now, obviously, I think I did certain things to, give them the confidence that I could make good decisions. But at the same time, they didn't restrict me or think about no, you're a girl, you should not be doing this. You're a woman, you should not be doing this. There was no such restriction for me. And, they kind of treated me as if I was, a son growing up in Nepal, right? And so that gave me a lot of, room to bloom as I was growing up. And, this risk-taking that I mentioned, I think that was where I got it from, right? It's because of my, the faith that my parents had in me, and they basically instilled in me this, I guess, attitude where I was not afraid of taking risks if I had a certain amount of confidence in me being able to go, kind of get it done. So I think it's because of that I've been able to kind of continuously push, the kind of the frontiers of what I'm working on. And I find myself, just doing things so that I can make my parents really proud, because I'm so grateful to them.
Yeah, that's great. I love that story. That's an amazing story. So they really had a huge impact on kind of who you are and how you fight for what you want. It sounds like they really were empowering in kind of raising you, and and really focused on that. Where did they get that from? Do you know? Have you ever asked them why were you like this? Because it seems like that's pretty uncommon. It sounds, the way that you're painting the picture, it sounds like they were a little bit of a maverick in parenting in Nepal.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think my mom has more of a contribution on this. She was one of the very few working women in Nepal at the time, right? So she had gone to kind of college, and then she had gotten a job, and she was essentially determined to make a life for herself. And typically women tend to, after they get married, they don't tend to go to their jobs, and they become working mothers, which is more celebrated here, but back in those times, it wasn't really celebrated. And so, I think she knew firsthand, the kind of independence that women need to have so that they can, continue to make their own decisions and be independent. She always had that kind of mindset. So from the very, beginning, right? Remembering my kindergarten days to the time I decided to kind of come off, go to college here in the States, they had always been, essentially giving me this, I guess support system where they were like, you can do anything you want as a woman, nothing will stop you. You can have a great family, you can do really, really good work, and what we want you to do is achieve even bigger and better things that we are not able to do. And it's up to you on what you want to do, but we do not want us to be somebody that kind of stops you from achieving far bigger things, right? And my parents are also really ambitious people who, I think because they were born in the wrong country and at the wrong time, and didn't have the resources because they were not born into privileged families, I think they would have gone a lot far in life, and they could not because they had constraints. And they wanted to make sure that I never felt emotionally those constraints, even though resources were still a constraint for me. My parents are not very well off, but they emotionally wanted me to believe that I could achieve anything.
Wow, I love it. That's amazing. And so, how many? So I know you have the one kid. You just have the one kid, or do you have more kids?
I just have the one kid.
Okay, cool.
And I did the other startup, and now I have this a new startup. So I guess I have 3 kids in total, but
3
one
kids, I love it.
actual
Yeah,
biological kid.
that's awesome. No, I mean, building a company is totally like having a kid. I mean, it's
Yeah.
totally your kid. Yeah, it's like one of the reasons why I love doing this show is because building a business is so enveloping. And it just building a career is very enveloping, and really trying to grow it is just it takes a lot of work,
Yeah.
mind share, and focus. And it's much easier to kind of just stay the status quo than it is to rise up. And so. I totally think it's like raising another kid. But I was gonna say was so how old is your kid, if you don't mind me asking?
3 years old.
3 years old. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, that's awesome. And okay, so then you don't have the ability to ask your kid what they think about what you're doing, but I guess I
Yeah.
can ask you, what are you thinking about for your kid? Are you trying to instill the same kind of empowerment and attitude towards life, and how much of that is that going to be instilled in them, or are you thinking about it a little bit differently? How are you thinking about parenting versus how you grew up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of respect towards other people who have got kind of gotten you so far, right? For me, everything that I've done, I think of my parents first and foremost, because I'm here because of what my parents did. And so I want my parents to be a lot more present in my kid's life, right? I want my son
Oh, cool.
to know his grandparents, and I want him to know where he has come from. And then also the situation is slightly different for me compared to my kid, right? I didn't have the privileges that my son can afford right now, and it's because of all of the things that I and my husband have done up until now. But that said, I always think about the most important thing in life, especially when you're raising a kid, is how can you raise confident but humble children, right? Humility and empathy is one of those, or two of those things that I want to make sure that my kid really, really has, regardless of what other kind of resources he may have in his life, right? And so I try to, kind of make sure that he's in environments where he can see what his roots are, where he has come from, where his family has come from, why it is important to make sure that, you're working to create an impact. And, just to make sure that he grows up humble, that's very important to me. And, for this last 3 months, that's another reason why we couldn't schedule this podcast earlier was I actually took him back to Nepal so that,
Wow.
he gets to see a little bit. And I plan to do that a little bit more frequently when he grows up so that he can actually remember more of it. But I want him to, always stay connected to his roots so that he can always stay humble and empathetic.
That's amazing. And you're intentionally wanting to expose him to the past and ensure that he knows where he's come from, but also see the opportunities that he has based on the fact that, like, you know, all the sacrifices that were made in the previous generations. It's really cool.
Yeah.
It's kind of, I mean, and I think you're doing the right thing, by the way. I mean, I have kids that are slightly older than yours. I have a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old. But we talk about this all the time. Like, oh, will the kids even remember this? Like, do we even need to go to the grandparents' house? Like, well, they're not even going to remember it when they're like, do you remember anything when you were 5 years old? I'm like, not really. But I still think it's important you do it, because even if you don't remember it when you're older, it definitely crafts, you know, who you are in that moment. So, like, the influences of, you know, my grandparents, I'm sorry, not my parents, their grandparents, you know, when they're 4 and 5, and those experiences they have now, like, now they can relate to, you know, they respond differently to different things because they now had this conversation or this kind of different culture smash, you know, from my parents, right? And so, like, it's just really interesting. And I think that they'll make different decisions because they're getting influenced by these different cultures and being exposed to it, which will then lead to who they will be in the future, even if they don't remember that trip, right? Even if they don't remember that trip that they took, you know, and then they wore their Korean dress, and then they, you know, paid respects for New Year's. Like, we did this whole thing for New Year's, and they got to, like, be, you know, seriously exposed to the Korean culture. You know, it was really fun because, you know, I mean, we live in Texas now, and we live far away from our family, and so it's not really the most, you know, it's not easy to expose them to Korean culture here.
Yes.
So being able to go back, you know, and being able to show them, you know, what that looks like was really fun for me, and it was really nice. And I think that, like, my wife and I were talking about, like, oh, should we keep doing that? And it's like, yeah, I think we should, because I think it impacts them. I think it impacts them, you know, and even if they don't remember it, it impacts who they are now, makes them make the decisions that are different. And then that will eventually craft who they are in the future, and it's a part of their life. So I love that you're doing that. Yeah, I love that you're doing this. Very, very intentional. But I am also very shocked that you are going to Nepal with a 3-year-old. Isn't that flight like 15 hours?
God. Oh, I think like, you know, I was really concerned about my kid, you know, just going crazy on that flight, but I think I was going crazy on that flight.
Yeah.
You know? It's just mind-numbingly long. Like, you know, we are just
How
like,
long is it?
it's literally like, you know, if you look America on the map, and, like, you know, you look at the opposite end of the world, it's there.
Yeah. Oh my
It's very, very
gosh.
long. So you have to take 2 trips and, like, 2 flights together. There is no direct flight. The first flight from the US, if you take it, then it's like roughly about 16 hours, and you go somewhere either in the Middle East or like Hong Kong, Singapore, something like that. And then you have a layover, a minimum of like 4 to 5 hours of layover with a 3-year-old. And then it's like another 4 or 5 hours flight. So, yeah, I mean, once again, right, like, there's a lot of endurance parenting that I do, meaning, like, I knew that was going to be tough. But at the same time, I wanted him, you know, to kind of get exposed to that environment. And then there, like, even though he will not remember it, like, you know, later on, there are pictures, there are videos, and, like, you know, over time, I think it requires, you know, we don't you know, kind of retain memory, but we can recollect our memories when we look at these pictures and videos later on, right? So
That's right.
I think
That's right.
I think it's important to show him, like, you know, for him to see the transformation. When I was 3 years old, Nepal was like this. When I was, you know, 6 years old, Nepal was like this, and, like, you know, just so that he gets adjusted to other cultures, other environments. And so he's not always just, like, comfortable where he is. I don't want him to be, like, you know, in his little, you know, kind of black hole. I want him to be very exposed to everything, you know, that I think kind of creates character.
I love that. I think I have a really good grasp of your thought process on parenting, and it sounds like you think of it a lot, and you're very philosophical about it, and you're spending the time to do the deep work to actually be intentional about it, which is great. Which is awesome, because normally I have to ask more questions about parenting, but in this instance, it sounds like you're doing a pretty good job about it. But I do want to now ask, how do you qualify success in business? Like, what are you thinking about in the business in the second startup? Are you also thinking that success is an acquisition? What are you thinking for this one? Is it like, you know, better time management, you know, fundraising on your, you know, you know, your bed with the pregnancy, and, like,
Oh my God.
I mean, what are the goals? What are the goals for the business this time around? Yeah, like, what are you thinking about? Yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that, when you're a founder, you think about things very similarly, but it does change when you're a second time founder. Like the first time when I started my company, and you have to remember, this is the backdrop of, women in the US, minority female, first time founder, women raise less than 2% of venture capital in the US, period, right? So, there's a lot that is going against you. You're kind of swimming upstream. So at that time, you're much, much, much more focused on, okay, I have to prove myself and I have to prove myself fast, right? So you're thinking about how can I make sure that my investors are extremely happy? How can I make sure that I hit these milestones of, okay, doing the first fundraise, doing this hire, getting to that first million in ARR, getting to that, month over month, 50% growth. Like you think about it in or at least I thought about it in very milestone focused approach to how I did business. And that's the reason, when we got a really, really amazing opportunity to kind of get early liquidity for both the team and for the investors. Obviously if the investors were not happy, I would not have done the acquisition or the sale. But when we got that really amazing opportunity and investors were like, okay, let's do this, then, I decided to do it, right? Now, the second time around, my focus is different. I've already proven myself, so there's not a lot of pressure from investors around hey, can Nami really build a startup? Okay, do I have to worry about execution risk from Nami? That's not the concern anymore. However, the concern is around, what I'm much more interested in doing is building a generational company this time around, right? I want this company to last the next 100 years and more, right? And I want this company to be my last company. And I want this company to be $100 billion company. So you're not only your desire for doing something big from a monetary perspective or investor return perspective gets bigger, but more importantly, your desire to truly make an impact, right? To make that dent in the universe becomes that much more magnified once you do not have the pressure of proving yourself execution-wise. And I think that's a lot of the benefit that I have of hindsight is that I know a lot of things about how first-time founders think of things, and I also know so many roadblocks that many first-time founders face that now I've already experienced those. So I don't think about things in the same kind of constrained terms anymore. So this time around, for me, what success really means is, am I going to be able to build something impactful that can last not just years, but more decades and hundreds of years, right? That's what my goal is. And then second is, first impact. And then obviously second is you have to be successful in terms of building a highly profitable business and a high growth business and profit that goes, along in, similar veins. So the investor ask and, kind of investor ambition is also much higher this time around. And I'm completely comfortable with that. So that has been kind of the difference between doing the first time founder and the second time founder route. The success metrics have gotten bigger and bigger, both on the emotional side and on the monetary side.
That's amazing. I love it. I can't wait to reconnect when in 5 or 10 years and your son's older. And I could ask him what he thinks about all of this. What he's building. Yeah.
I love that because I feel like this podcast can be a time capsule for kind of my views about parenting or how my kid thinks of it because there's so many times, right? Where I have had to make trade-offs between me spending time with my kid versus me doing things for my company, right? There are times where I'd rather just kind of have him on my lap and read a story to him or go play with him for a little bit longer or take him somewhere and you have to make these trade-offs. And sometimes I think there's only a certain number of years when he's going to be young, right? And so I think about it, okay, did I have to do this startup when he was less
That's
than
right.
1 year old, when I was pregnant, and when he's like 5 years old, this new company will have already been 2 years old, right? So I'm doing I'd have done two companies in the span of his birth to being 5 years old. And so
Yeah.
sometimes I feel like, am I doing justice to him as a mother? Because he's not getting what he would have gotten from a full-time mother. Like that I
Yeah.
know. He is definitely, I'm not giving him what he should have gotten what he would have gotten if I were a full-time mother. But at the same time, my hope is that in whatever precious time I have with him, all my love for him that he would have gotten within, if I were a full-time mother, I think that love I'd compress it and give it to him in the very precious moments that I do have with him. But I don't know if he's going to understand that, and I don't know if that is right. I feel this guilt all the time. That's my hardest thing about being a parent. I'm always consumed with guilt about how I'm not able to give more time to my kid. And how, whenever I'm thinking about anything other than him, I'm always thinking that, sometimes you're just like, this is not fair to him, but ultimately, if I become successful in my business, and if I'm building successful businesses, if I'm successful in my career, obviously he's going to be the beneficiary of it. But at the same time, is he going to understand that, or would he say Mom, you should have spent more time with me? I don't know, and that guilt consumes me all the time.
Yeah. That's like the truest and most vulnerable thing you could ever have said. And again, I have to give you now two kudos, because you have articulated something that I've been wrestling with articulating so well. You just articulated I have that same guilt constantly, and I try to make up for it by oh, we're gonna do this big trip, and then we're gonna I'm just gonna focus all on you. And my wife's always like, they'd be just as happy playing with dirt in a pot in the yard, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to do this elaborate Disney thing. And I'm like, but it's for me, it's I'm sequestering my time with them, so I'm trying to compress as much magic into it, and so I'm
Yeah.
trying to qualitatively compensate for it. So, and I don't know, man, I'm really Nami, I think you just articulated it so well. It's the unknown of it, but all you can do is because at the same token, the only thing I'll add to what you said is that I don't know if it's good for my kids to see me not being happy either, right? And really driving for that thing that you said in the beginning, that individuality of
Yeah.
because my wife says it all the time. She's like, if you were completely done, and you were happy, and you were financially independent, all that stuff. I'm sorry, not happy, but financially independent, and you had all these things made up, and all these things were going well, you would last maybe 2 months. You would last maybe 2 months, and you would get so miserable. You would get depressed. You would get you would just be the unhappiest person ever. You need to be in pain. She thinks I love pain. She's like, you love the stress of solving problems,
Yeah.
and you're the happiest when you're not happy. And I'm like, it's so interesting to hear that from my wife, who knows me really, really well, and she just knows. She just knows that if I ever reached my goal, I'll have a new goal. I'll find something else that I have to conquer. And so I'm as I get older, and my kids are, really changing the way I think about life. I've been really trying to understand myself better, and really understanding that I think I don't know how to handle that guilt. I definitely don't know how to handle it. So if you figure it out, please let me know.
Well, I was hoping that you could help me through it, because you talk to a lot more parent friends, right?
I
But
do.
yeah,
I do.
that seeking of individuality, I think it's super important to just make sure that you are taking care of yourself as well. And I hope that is something that my kid will understand later, right? Maybe he will not understand it when he's 10 years old, but when he becomes a parent, he will understand. It's super important to make sure that there's a semblance of you that exists beyond being a parent, even though being a parent is something that I absolutely truly love. Where's Nami in all of this, right? Nami as a mother versus Nami as an individual needs to coexist. And there were times, and especially like, kind of post pregnancy, post birth, a lot of women deal with like, postpartum depression.
Yeah.
I didn't deal with postpartum depression, but I definitely had a lot of thoughts about like, I'm suddenly a mother, and every time anybody talks to me, it's always about like me as a mother, right? Like when I talk to my friends, it's about like, hey, how is your kid? How are you? Like, how has it been, right? And so like, all of a sudden, like, it's not about what do you do? Hey, Nami, do you want to just like, go get a drink and talk about you? It's not about like my emotions. It's not about my happiness or my sadness. Nothing like that. It's always about you as a parent, right? And then I've also seen like, that sometimes that individuality goes away, even for non-parents, like, after you get married, right? It's about you as a couple, like, how are other people doing in the relationship, right? And so I have, I realized it at that time that, I need to make sure that I need to keep my individuality going. And for me, the way to retain that individuality is putting my thoughts into like, kind of building really cool new products, right? Mm-hmm. That's something that, I really love doing. I love, building products that can make an impact. That was the thesis for, when I built Harvest. And that's the thesis for when I'm building Neural currently. Like, I want to provide earned wage access and real-time payroll to people globally. If you have work today, you need to have access to that money today. Like, why should you wait a month later to have that? So you think about it in impact and like, how can that impact be connected to you? But at the same time, like, it's a constant struggle about, okay, if I was not doing this, I'd have been able to spend more time with my kid. That's the reality. And I hope my kid will forgive me for that.
I think it's a really interesting concept and thought process, and I love that you're doing the deep work to think about that. I think on a more tactical and pragmatic level, I love what you just said about using my podcast as a time capsule for people. So I'm gonna like mark a note and say like maybe I'll try to interview your kid in like 10 years, and like when they're 13, I really should actually consider interviewing the kids. That's actually really funny. And like figuring out like what they think about their parents and how ask them how they think they did and all those other things. That could be a really fun episode, but. Hey, Nami, I do want to be respectful of your time, so I really like to squeeze in 5 I think it's 6 now, with rapid fire questions that I like to ask every guest. So there's like some consistency to the interviews. So I'm going to jump into those rapid fire questions, okay?
Yep.
What advice do you have for other parents and soon to be parents?
Sleep more.
Yeah, that's a good one. If you could go back and tell yourself one thing before having kids, what would you tell yourself?
Oh, well, sleep more. and then also, I think I'd tell myself, like, one thing that I did not know before, I became a parent and nobody told me was how kids get constantly sick. And that's just normal, and you do not need to freak out. Like, it's just part of growing up, part of, kind of building your immunity. But that freaked me out, like, the first several months, like, when my kids started going to daycare, like, it just started freaking me out because you get sick and, like, come home and get sick all the time. But, it's okay. Like,
totally.
Let them get adjusted to, both the good and bad of the world.
I'm kind of a germaphobe. I'm like, anyways, my wife and I always disagree because she's like, dirt is good, let them be dirty. And I'm like, oh, wash your hands and sanitize it. And I just like, it's so funny. But just to give you some forewarning, and I'm sure you've already realized this and it sounds like you've already validated it, but it's not going to stop. Like, our family gets sick once a month. It's just like every 3 weeks, someone is sick and then the whole family gets it. And then by the time the last one stops being sick, the next one gets sick and then it starts all over. Like, our family's constantly, every single month. And I've talked to so many parents about this and they say it doesn't stop until like 7, 8, maybe even 10 years old when they actually like have a big immunity and they're better about washing their hands and stuff, right? But like, just get used to being sick all the time.
All the time, yeah. Get used to being sick.
Yeah, get used to it. Yeah, like the whole family. Like, it's just it's just one of those things. So just to give you a little heads up.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, what is the most surprising thing you learned about yourself after becoming a parent?
Yeah, I mean, becoming a parent has been such a amazing learning experience. I feel like you're constantly finding things about yourself, but I did not know, or at least like you think you know, but you don't know to what extent how much love you're capable of. Like you think you know love, and then you have a baby, and then you know that this love is this like infinity of infinity that it just like you don't know where it comes from, but it comes to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did not know that somebody could be so capable of love to their kids, and this is true for every parent, right? Not just
Yeah.
for me as a mother. I feel like every mother, loves their kid, probably the equal amount as I do. But you never
Yeah.
think that you could love
Oh,
anything
yeah.
else so much.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. That is so insightful and so true. I've always like, oh my gosh, I love my dog so much, and like I treat them like my kids, and like I think I couldn't have loved anything more. And then
Yeah.
I met my wife, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I love my wife. I can actually say, I can confidently say I love my wife more than my dogs. I'm like, that's really messed up. That sucks. And then now my kid, I'm like, my dogs and my wife are like down here, and my kids
Yeah.
are like way up here. Yeah. I
Yeah.
love my
Yeah.
kids infinitely more. It's just like unbelievable amount of love that I have for them, and it's just unfathomable. It's just yeah, that's a really good one. Really, really good one. What is your favorite all time? What's your all time favorite business book?
Okay. So there's a couple of contenders, but I think I have to kind of stay true to my venture founder route and say there's this book by Brad and Mendelsohn called Venture Deals. So I read that book the first time, I was starting out my last company, and I needed to kind of get up to speed on everything about venture capital, right? Good, bad, ugly, term sheets, how to raise, how to think about, hiring, when to think about kind of growing a team in a certain way, things like that. And this book called Venture Deals by Bradfeld and Mendelsohn, really, really amazing book. I think it just stays true. Whenever I look at it, regardless of the market, right? Like 2021 was like a huge roaring bull market, and now it's like an absolute bear market with
Yeah.
funding, drying up and everything. But that book has just such good nuggets of wisdom for founders all the time.
That's awesome. I've never read it, so I appreciate that. I love finding new books to read. And then my last question to bring us home: when you're not building the next big tech company and being a super mom, traveling to Nepal with a 3-year-old, what does Nami do for fun? What's your downtime activities? How do you recharge?
Oh, I bake. I love baking.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I bake.
I would not have guessed that. That's awesome.
I find a lot of solace in cooking when you're kind of thinking about completely different things from what I'm doing during the day, right? I'm not thinking about my computer, I'm not thinking about my business, I'm not thinking about this and that with the kid. I'm just thinking about, okay, I'm gonna make this really, really good food, right? So both cooking, try to cook every single day during the weekdays so that it's a stress reliever. And then I love baking, so I experiment with all kinds of baking.
That's awesome. That's really
During the
great,
during the
Nami.
COVID time, remember there was
The
this
sourdough craze.
sourdough. Oh my God! Yeah, these days I make really good sourdough bread.
Awesome, awesome. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, very good. Thank you so much for taking the time to be on my show. I know it's a really hectic life that you're living, and it's hard to get on your calendar. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to share your insight and your story and your perspective on parenting and work. I really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it was such an absolute pleasure. This is, I'm talking to a parent friend, right? I don't get to do this often, honestly. So thank you for providing a platform to, talk about these things. And also, I think as a female founder, as a working mother, I think there's not that many avenues where you are not just complaining about your kid, but also talking about all things, right? Things that we discussed, like individuality, your childhood, things like that. So thanks for, kind of building this forum to talk about these things.
Oh
I
my
don't think there's
gosh.
that many places you can talk about things like that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you found benefit in it in multiple facets. That's really good, and I really appreciate you saying that. And just to let you in on a little secret, this is my therapy. Like, I literally just do this because it's super fun talking to people
I might
about
have
it.
to join you. Like, I might have to join you,
Yeah.
and we could do this, like, together when you have, like,
Please,
your
yeah.
next whatever guest. But
Yeah.
this was super fun. Thanks for including
I'm
me.
so glad. Thank you for saying that. I really appreciate it. Let's keep learning together. I would love to. I'd love to be on this journey with you. That's the whole premise, right? So, and then let's try to catch up. I know you're super busy, but I know we're local together. So let's try to grab lunch or see it reconnect at a founders dinner again.
Absolutely. Fridays, generally better.
Okay, sounds good. We'll talk soon, Nami. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you for listening to The Girl Dad Show. Please take a moment to follow us on social media. You can find us at The Girl Dad Show on all major platforms. We look forward to staying in touch and keeping you up to date with all the new guests that are coming out.